So as I was saying, everyone, thank you for joining me. It was a little bit short notice, and actually, the idea of running this landscape course again was a little bit short notice because I enjoyed it so much last year, but I wanted to strip it back a little bit. I dove in with both feet and did so much, and I enjoyed it so much. But I'm aware that if you're just starting out with backgrounds and landscapes, that maybe there was a lot to take in. So my idea with these next few weeks is it's sort of pinned onto the newsletter. It's a little bit more informal. You can chat to me, so you can reply to the newsletter emails or send me, your work in progress. I'd love to see them. I'm happy to give sort of informal feedback. That would be, yeah, absolutely lovely. So this afternoon, as I was saying, I've got a I've got the photograph reference photo on my tablet. I've also got it on my phone here. The phone I think is quite useful. It's on sort of airplane mode, but the phone is quite useful because that's the kind of size that we're working to this afternoon. And I've got a business card, so that's my business card. That's the kind of size we're going to work to this afternoon. So don't worry too much about measuring things. We're going to focus on those little trees. So we're going to look at that horizon line and how tips for getting that horizon line, those little trees in. And those little trees are going to be the key to giving depth to all our landscape pieces. So hopefully you've got access to that reference photo. If not, don't worry too much. The way I do little trees is the same for lots of different landscapes. So I did do a couple of practices of my poppy field. So we're going to zoom out a little bit. So we're going to work on building up all the techniques that we'll need for doing a little poppy field. The idea being that a poppy field is one of the most intimidating things I think you can do with a background. Imagine you've got a lovely family portrait or a dog or whatever sitting in a field. The most intimidating thing I can think to do is grass, and then that grass has got lots of flowers in it. Like, what could be more intimidating than that, I think. So we're going to work up to that kind of background, and we're going to start today with techniques for doing these trees in the background. So I'm working on a piece of Strathmore Bristol Vellum 400. I've used the same technique across multiple surfaces, and for me it's exactly the same. So don't worry what kind of paper that you're using. I don't tend to use film, so it might be a little bit different how you work with film, but otherwise hot press, rising museum board, even pastel mats, I use the same kind of techniques. And with the little trees, it's more about thinking about our textures. So thinking about what the trees feel like and thinking about getting that depth. And the key to the depth is pushing it back with our paler sort of pencils. So our cool blues and violets and maybe even sort of a white to almost burnish, but more adjust the saturation. So we want low saturation colours in the background, and then that allows us to bring depth into the foreground. So I'm going to switch my camera now so you're looking at more interesting things, which is the artwork in progress. Ooh. And the board rather than me. So I'm aware I've disappeared. I'm coming back, I promise. Yeah, if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat. I will check that as I go. So this is my setup. And oops. Right, I'm not going to zoom in all the way because I want to make sure that I'm in focus. So this is about as far as I'm going to go. And ta-da, that's what I made earlier. So I did a little bit of a practice. So this is what we're going to work on this afternoon. This is a simplification of our of our reference photos. This is our reference photo. Put the two together there. Okay. It's a little bit unfair to see it it looks really washed out next to the reference photo, and it will a little bit because of the lighting in here to get the colours right. It's quite bright lighting, and the colours will adjust. If I take that phone away, the camera will adjust a bit and those colours will change a little bit. But what we're looking for working on today is this bit here, and then if you want to carry on with the rest of it, you can do. I'm not going to concentrate on the grass today. We're going to do that another week. So we've got I'm allowing now 55 minutes, and then I've got to go on a school run. So we've got 55 minutes. I did these little trees at the background here in about 20. So I'm allowing lots of time for questions, and then I'm going to think about how we might get in this little reed bed as well. So if you're gathering supplies and things together, I did send some suggestions round. The key, I think, to these little backgrounds, and I'll show you again so there's my little poppy. This is one version that I did, a test version. Again, it's the same sort of colours that I've got here. This one's on a different surface, so this is Arches Hot Press. So you can see the techniques are fairly similar. The trees look fairly similar across those. And then this one's Rising Museum Board, and I've just played around with a bit heavier pressure on there. The techniques are exactly the same. I just spent a little bit longer on that one. I've got a few more layers on there. So the kinds of things we're thinking about, and I've got some little notes here because I was making, what I was trying to do is to put together that email for you, like a preview of the kinds of things that we were thinking about. So what I want you to first think about when looking at that reference photo, and you can do that while I'm talking, is it is actually really helpful to imagine that you're a giant, okay? So a lot of us have come with some experience of working with colour pencils, and maybe we work a lot with animals, or maybe you do, you know, highly detailed pieces, and now you're thinking about the vastness of the landscape. The problem is with working on our phones or a tablet, as you know, is you can zoom right in and look at all that detail that you can get in those trees. What we need to think about is taking a step back and actually thinking about what are the bigger sort of value changes that we can see. What are the kinds of textures that we want for the size of the piece that we're trying to develop? So here, I imagine that maybe some of these trees at the back, they're like deciduous oaks and things like that, probably here. They're quite I would imagine if I was a giant, they feel quite sort of soft and spongy. The reeds in the front here would feel quite furry, so we might want to use some techniques that we're using for fur. And then the grass at the front might feel quite spiky, or maybe we want that a little bit furry. So we're going to keep in mind those sort of bigger picture ideas. Pencils, because we want it to recede, because we want it to come back, we need to also need to think about leaving somewhere for us to go. So this tree, for example, here, if I was to work on this further and bring it forward, I might want to make it an awful lot darker. In order to make that darker and bring that forward, I've got to have these trees here. The contrast needs to be lower. So we need to think about not replicating the colours that are exactly on the screen. We want things to have sort of subtle purple hue, maybe. So something like an ultramarine violet. This is my go-to. This is the one I have all the time on standby. I have used as well Delft blue, so the Delft blue and the polychromos, or a violet even. So something that's purple leaning, something that's cool and purple leaning. So not red and purple leaning, not like a Caput Morton violet where it's got lots of red in it. We want something cool and purple. So we want something like that. If you've got the ultramarine violet, that's going to be perfect. If not, then I suggest something like the Delft blue or a violet, and then adding a bit of white on top. So those two together are going to get you closer to here. You can imagine that a light layer of the violety blue plus a bit of white on top is going to get you closer to there. So you need something like that on hand. Then I'd say something like an earth green. So this is an earth green polychromos, or the green earth in the Derwent Lightfast. That's quite nice. It's like a dull grey green, but it's a really nice pushed back sort of colour. Pushed back, I mean, it's dull, it's less vivid than, say, wow, look at that. So this is my spring green. So this is a spring green. This is the Pablo version. I could get the luminance version. It's basically a bright yellowy green. It really doesn't matter which ones you pick, but I've used that colour in this middle section here for just a bit of a pop, and there's a little bit of a pop in some of these background trees as well with that as well. So something light in yellow. A favourite of mine is this kind of almost olivey green. This is a khaki green in the Pablo. I use this quite a lot. Again, if you've not got something like that, you can sort of mix it with even something like a raw umber on top of one of these colours will get you closer to there, or like an ochre colour. But you can see that we've got something that's not quite as bright in your face there, and then we want something dark. So here is so this one is a chromium green opaque. That one is quite a dark, cool one. Or I think I mentioned as well the chromium oxide green. They're not very different. And if you wanted to get even further sort of a darker green, then just layer on top your dark indigo on one of these. So I was intending not to provide sort of a shopping list for you and a few options, but really, so what we're talking about is, and I don't want to confuse you all with laying out all these pencils, but basically you need something purpley, you need something dark green, hopefully something sort of a middle dull green, like an earth green. It's worth investing in that one if you've not got that one already. And then something a little bit more vivid. If you've got the khaki green, that's quite a nice one as well. So those sorts of pencils on standby. And as I say, we're going to work quite small. So I made this little bounding box. So I use it a lot, and I've just taken a mount and I've chopped it in half, and I've stuck it back together again at 6 by 6 centimeters. And what I do is I just use this for any of my test pieces, and I usually get a sepia 10% or a violet grey, because that's kind of a neutral colour. It sits well with lots of different colours. I've got fossil grey here, and I just draw around that. It's equivalent in size, I think I said it a minute ago, it's roughly sort of a business card size. That's my business card. So that's the kind of size we're working to. Don't worry too much about the size, is the message there. Make sure I've got a backup on that camera as well. So let's get drawing. Enough talking from me. Unless you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. So I've got my little box here. I'm just going to draw around that, or you could draw around a business card or something, just some sort of defining working area. And because we've got that sort of nice reed bed in the middle, I thought it was quite nice to actually start there. So if you've got a lighter green, so something like that khaki green, or even really light pressure with a spring green, something light and bright and yellowy green, and that's just going to define sort of halfway across our drawing. So I'm not going all the way to the end there. I'm sort of halfway down, about half a centimetre across. And what I'm going to do there is I'm just going to flick upwards. So rather than do a doodle at the top here, So rather than go straight across like this, my reed bed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do little lines like this all the way across, and I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to use light pressure, and I'm just going to go across with my light yellowy colour, and I'm just going to put that in as sort of, this is effectively going to be the base of our trees. This is going to allow us, if we wanted to finish the whole piece. And I'm aware that that yellow isn't showing up terribly well there, but it's this sort of technique that we've got here. Just going across like that, really gentle pressure, and then I might come in again really lightly and just fill that in just a little bit. So instead of then having this big thick line across, we've got more something with a bit of texture. So what we're thinking about the whole time is what would these things feel like if this was fabric, if we were giants, if we could actually touch and feel these things. To help sort of show this up a little bit more, so I went in there with my bright yellowy spring green. If I come underneath here, I'm going to just flick underneath a little bit. I've got my khaki green now, so that's more of an olivey green, so a bit of a mucky green, and I'm just going to flick into there a little bit. The wonderful thing about landscapes is it doesn't matter a sausage if you follow the reference photo exactly. This is your excuse, your freedom to have a play and to do different things, and every time I've done a little sketch of this landscape it's going to be completely different, and that is absolutely fine. That is, you know, wonderful. So I've got 2 pencils down there, super light pressure, and if you couldn't see, I'm just going to demonstrate up here again with a darker pencil. So what I've then done with that second layer is I've just gone underneath like this, super light pressure. So that's the base of my reed bed, and now we're going to go into those trees at the back. I'd suggest using your earth green for this if you've got it. If not, you could go with one of your other, I'd say sort of a mid-dull green if you've got one. Either that, a dark green maybe, but you know, really light, barely touching the paper kind of pressure. And then what we're going to do with it is we're going to get some of the shapes in of these trees in the background. And sometimes it's easier to see some of the darks first. So I can see, let me get my phone up again so it's easier for me to point to what I'm looking at. So I can see this tree here, so I think I'm going to do this one here because it's quite dark in the majority here. Then we've got a sort of a lighter bit here, and then these trees over here are a little bit dark. So I'm going to come down here just to get the feel of the paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go sketchy backwards and forwards down here to get a rough tree shape. I'm not worried about each of these individual, you see these little pockets of leaves here that are closer to us. We're going to get that texture in a little bit later. What we want for this section, and I'll demo over here, is we're holding the pencil. I find it useful to hold the pencil relatively far back, and I'm just doing sort of sketchy circles. We're just practicing doing sort of sketchy circles, and there's naturally some little breaks and things. They don't have to be, those little breaks don't have to be in the exact pace on the photo either. So if I was following the photo, I might do a little bit there, and then a little bit here, and then a little bit there, and then we're coming down, and I'm just sketching. I'm not taking my pencil off the paper, I'm just sketching backwards and forwards. We're just practicing really light pressure, really sketchy motion. So if I was doing let's say I was doing the sky, and I wanted a block colour or I wanted a graduated colour and I wanted to just fill it in, what I might do is sit really carefully and just for hours, just go round and round in circles, backwards and forwards like this. And you do one layer, and then you come back and you do another layer, and you just keep on going. I'm suggesting something a little freer, which is why I hold it back a little bit, and we're just like, if you were a child and you were just scribbling, what would you do? So we're going to do some scribbling. So I'm going to scribble in light pressure, one of these trees here. I'm going to come down almost to the top of that yellow. I'm not actually going to touch that yellowy green yet. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. So if I was up here, I'm coming down a little bit, but I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. The reason for that is we're going to flick into that a little bit later. So we're leaving a little bit of a gap, and then we're going to come across and just getting a feel for where some of those trees might be. And if you're trying to match up what I've drawn with the reference photo, you won't be able to, because I'm concentrating on the textures and the general shape. So the general shape of those trees is sort of going down and drawing our eye this way. So they're getting a little bit smaller as they're going that way. But otherwise, I'm not worried about where all of those sort of gaps and things are. I'm just getting in a bit of texture, especially on this version. So hopefully that's making sense. If not, do shout. So I've got a very gentle light layer in there now. We're using my earth green at the back. Once you're relatively happy with the shape of that, then I would say now is a good time to preserve some of those lighter areas. So if you did want a little pop of colour, for example, so if we bringing our reference photo back, if I did want, say, these bits to be a little bit more yellowy, that bit there's a little more yellowy tree on here, I might want to, and we're catching the light over on this side a little bit. So there and there, I might want to put a little bit of yellow, maybe on the top there, maybe on the top there. Just have a little look at it and think, is there anywhere where I'd like to maybe bring it forward just a little bit? So I might, here I've got my olivey green, my khaki green, and just put a little bit there, a little bit, a little there, and maybe a little bit on this side as well. So we've not got many layers in at the moment at all, and that's fine. We're just, taking it slow. One of the colours that is a little bit more specialist that I haven't mentioned already is this middle verdigris. This is a lovely one, and you can kind of go straight in with this. Even so, if you've got a harder pressure, you might want to go straight in with this. I'm avoiding this because not everybody's got this, and I think you can achieve something similar just using a really light pressure with the earth green. The middle verdigris is almost like this earth green if you added white to it. So if you find you're going in too dark too soon, then this is a nice pencil. It's also a nice sort of blending pencil as well. So I've got a couple of colours in there, and it's not a complete sort of layer down yet. I like to come in with quite a pale colour at quite an early stage. I don't think of it as burnishing because I'm not really blending anything together. I'm grabbing any pigment that's loose on top and I'm just moving it around a little bit. So if you've got anything like a white or even a light aqua that's a little bit blue leaning, or an Arctic, those are nice pencils. But I'm just going to go in with my white, and I'm just going to really gently just add a layer of pigment on top, and you won't see anything, and it will barely make any difference at all. You can see I'm being quite loose with it, big sweeps. I'm using very, very gentle pressure. I'm just trying to transfer a little bit of white. And the reason why I'm doing it at this point is that if I sat here first of all and said, let's go in with our white and just define these trees, you'd have no idea where on the paper I was doing it. At least here, because I've got this initial pigment down, you know that I'm just kind of going over the top of those other layers that I've done. And it's just a really light pressure. It's a little bit of a resist there. And then it's a bit of a dance then, backwards and forwards with these other colours. We're just building the layers up gently. So I probably now switch back to my sort of earthy green, and then I try, now is the point when I try and add in some of those shapes a little bit more. So I might try and put in a few of those little pockets. So leave a few of those more highlighty bits. And so now my technique, if I do another doodle at the top here. So now my technique is more like this. So I'm just sort of dotting around and scribbling. Whereas before, so my first layer is almost, don't take my pencil off the paper, really light pressure, scribble the shape of a tree in. At the next stage, I'm just being a little bit more precise about where I'm putting those darker bits. And the thing you need to keep reminding yourself is that these are your trees and it doesn't have to match the reference photo. You're thinking about how you might achieve the sort of texture of a sponge. So if you imagine drawing a sponge and you didn't want to do hyperrealism and copy a photo, well, how would you do it? Well, you might start by scribbling sort of shapes of the sponge, and then you might go in and add a few of the sort of holes in there. That's the kind of technique that we're going for. So it's sort of this initial scribble plus a few sort of random dots, and then that will give you something like we've got up here. And then if you imagine that we're just adding different layers in, it's going to build up that texture for us. And it's about how you enjoy doing it the most. So you might find that you actually enjoy putting in the darkest colours first, and actually having more of an outline first works for you. I like this sort of, it reveals itself technique. So I am holding my pencil, I've noticed I'm holding my pencil quite close to the end here. I think this is mainly because my pencil's getting a little bit short and I find it weird. I've not got as much control if I'm holding it back here. So if it looks like I'm being really really precise with it, I'm not really. I have increased my pressure a little, and my guidance with pressure on here is, if you're making no difference at all, increase your pressure, but otherwise keep it super gentle. So super gentle pressure, unless I can't see the pencils making any difference, and I might as well not be even doing anything, in which case I'm increasing that pressure just a little, just enough to make a few marks on there. And I'm approaching those reeds then now already. So I'm approaching those reeds, and what I suggest doing, if you pop those in, I suggest at this point you just flick your pencil down just a little bit, and you're not drawing the reeds. What you're effectively doing is drawing the space behind the reeds. So it is very faint on that computer, isn't it? So let's do a dramatic version down here. It's my dramatic leaves, reeds here. And then we've come down, I've done my initial scribbled tree, another scribbled tree, and then I might have gone in with a bit of a khaki highlight in there, and then what did I do? I put a little bit of white on top, So that's where we are. And then what we're doing now is just adding more precise sort of gap shadows almost in that tree. So I'm going back in then and sort of refining that shape, increasing my pressure a little bit. So that's the sort of state we're at with that. And then what I'm saying is when you get closer to this reed bed here, you flick the darker green into that reed bed. And this is not, you don't need to do hard pressure because we're going to go even darker in a minute. So we're going to go really dark in a minute. These are just sort of the training layers. So we're just going to flick a little bit down. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's what I'm doing there. So on this one, I'm just flicking down into that reed bed just a little bit. And now I have, I'd say it's probably 60% covered here. So it's not even covered everywhere, apart from that white, which went everywhere. I'd forgotten about that white. So the white's going to add a little bit of a, for me, a little bit of protection on there. So that if we wanted to use a darker colour, it's not going to have a huge impact on the paper. So say, for example, you'd only got a delft blue or a violet, and you haven't got an ultramarine violet for the next bit. If I tell you to go in with your violet, you're going to have a wash that looks like that quite easily. If I first said, well, no, put down a layer of white first, then when you come in with your ultramarine violet, your violetty colour, it's not going to have so much of an impact. You have to consciously press a lot harder. So I think that's quite a useful sort of middle step. I recommend now picking up either your ultramarine violet, if you've got one, so this is the luminance version, or something blue violety from one of the other ranges, and we're just going to do a glaze of that colour all the way on top, just like we did with the white, all the way on top, unless you hit a really bright pocket of trees that are quite yellow leaning. So this one here, for example, so the one that's sort of halfway in the middle, you might want to leave that for a little bit of interest, a little bit yellowy. So I might leave that one a little bit yellowy, so I'm going everywhere but that. I'm holding the pencil relatively far back, so I'm not controlled. I don't care exactly where the pencil goes. I'm just doing a little glaze of that colour on top, and I'm doing that almost everywhere. And it's just sending everything back a bit into the paper. So it's giving it a blue or a purple hue is going to recede these trees into the paper further. And we're just then going to rotate through that technique, adjusting as we go. So we've got a little bit of a purple glaze now. So if I did it on my demo area over here, I've now got a purple glaze on here. And I'm losing some of that definition. I'm losing some of the hard work I put into with all those trees. So I want a dark green now. So if you've got a dark green, and dark green, I'd suggest dark and blue leaning. So you want it to be closer to blue than closer to yellow. And most dark greens are, to be fair. So this is a chrome oxide green. This is my polychromos. My other favourite green is this. This is Museum Aquarella. It's a dark thiocyanine green, which is really beautiful. I do use this quite a lot. But again, that's a specialist one, so I won't play with that. Okay, so the chrome oxide green, and now again we're using that same sort of technique that we had over here with this sort of stippling, and we're just almost adding detail in. So we're just sort of sketching in some of the darker bits. We're looking at the value changes, the relative value changes. And we're going to see that actually we've got some darker bits at the base of a lot of these trees, so they can come a lot darker. And then we've got the gaps between the foliage, some of those branches, so they can go darker. And at this point you'll be thinking, oh, I'm losing all my purple. We're going to put the purple back again in a minute. So light pressure, we just want to make a little bit of a difference at this stage. And it's practicing sort of, with these techniques, it's loosening up. It's how we go from how we've always done it to trying something a little bit different, and maybe almost a looser way of drawing. We're trying to get the feel of the landscape more than rely on exactly what's there. So you can see again, if I take this chrome oxide green, then the darker green, and I just poke it into these reeds a little bit, what we're going to end up with is a more jaggedy top here. So you might find it, if you do this again, you might find it useful to maybe make this reed bed a little bit thicker. So mine's gone quite thin now because I've gone into it a little bit. But I think it's quite important. So again, let me do it on my demo area down here. So I've got these greens coming down here. Scribbly, 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 scribbly. And then when I get to the top here, I think it's quite important that we have a jaggedy line for the top of these reeds rather than a straight across. And that's how we do it. And that's how we do it quickly without being too precise with it. And then all of a sudden it looks as it will look as if we've got a depth to those reeds here. So this end, I've lost quite a lot of my purple, which is a bit of a shame. So I'm feeling a little bit sad that it's not as blue coloured as I want it to be. So my options then are to come back in with my ultramarine purple, my ultramarine violet, or I could put in my white and actually see what happens if I do a gentle layer of white, particularly because I'm using the Bristol vellum. So because I'm using the Bristol vellum, a lot of the time the pigment sort of sits on top. So I can probably smudge that just a little bit. You might be able to see that. But the pigment sits on top of the fibres quite a lot. And even without burnishing, even just taking a white, and this isn't a sharp white, that's not a sharp white, just doing a little gentle layer on top, it's going to just mix those colours together and soften everything. Because that was the other thing that we sort of said when we started, that actually we want these trees, I'm using really light pressure unless it doesn't make a difference, in which case I'm increasing it ever so slightly. So one of the first things we said about how these trees might feel at this size, if we were a giant and we were in this landscape, or the landscape was made out of fabric, would it be soft and spongy? Would it be hard and spiky like holly bushes? No, it's going to be quite soft at this scale. So how do we get that softness? Well, we can get it by just doing a little glaze of white over the top. And I feel as if I want a little bit more purple now in mine. The way the green's kind of gone on top, it's quite a dominant colour. Purple can be quite neutral, especially when it's sort of sitting next to these yellows. That's the other thing I wanted to mention with the purple. The beauty of using this purple is that, as you may know from your colour theory, that if you combine the purple with the yellow, it's just going to bring it towards the center of that color wheel because they're complementary colors. So they're going to counteract and sort of make a duller color rather than making a necessarily mucky color. You're just going to get a darker version of that yellow. So the purple is going to sit really nicely with a lot of those greens, and then obviously the purple sits nicely with a blue green as well because purple is next to blue on the colour wheel. So you can't go far wrong by adding sort of purples in here. So I've naturally then just, as I've been talking, just picked up this purple. I'm just doing another glaze then of this purple colour on top, and it is taking it again further back towards that colour that I wanted. Now if I bring in one of those other examples, then you can see on here probably I've got this mix of some quite purpley bits and some darker greeny bits, and then some more yellow leaning bits in here as well. Put that next to there. You can see I can go quite a lot further with my layers because I've gone quite light in my pressure. So there's a way to go if I want to. And to speed things up a bit, what I might do is bring in something like a dark indigo. So I could bring in a dark indigo. So if you've got that, you could bring that in just in those shadowy areas. Or if you've not got that, go back to the chrome oxide green, a dark green, or even a Payne's grey. So that's a blue leaning, very, very dark grey. I didn't mention I don't think I mentioned the dark indigo, so I'm going to go back with the chrome oxide green. But again, this is the time to sort of play with it. So I'm going to go back in now and I'm going to do another layer, and I'm not trying to go over the area that I went over before. I'm very loosely following the reference photo, just in terms of ideas more than anything. And mine will definitely not look the same as yours because mine, as I say, is deviated a little bit from that reference photo because I've just sort of followed my instinct with it a little bit. And again, because I've gone then the green with this, it's pulled the purple away. So that's when a blue might be more useful. I'm going to go back in with my white and just a gentle layer, just to knock back the saturation a little bit. So if you think of saturation as being sort of the depth of the colour, how vivid it is, how sort of bright it is, how much colour it has, then in order to knock that back, you either add grey, white or black if it was a paint. And we're doing the same sort of thing with the coloured pencils. We're just knocking those colours back a little bit. I'm increasing my pressure with every layer. I've gone back to my purple now because, or my violet, because my trees are getting very green again and I don't want them quite so green. Actually, it's going to be more effective if all of your horizon trees have a purple hue to them. So if it all looks slightly purpley and you think that doesn't look right, when it comes to popping it together in that final composition, it's going to look fantastic because of the atmospheric effect. There's something called the atmospheric effect in the way that light filters. So if you go out into the countryside, later and you have a look at maybe a hillscape and there's lots of different trees in there, the ones furthest from you will look blue or purple and they'll look paler because there's a natural sort of haze. So that's what we're artificially putting in. The problem with the photos is, as I say, cameras are so good that we could obsess over everything. A landscape artist, if we're working with paints and we're working with oils, what they'll tell you to do is to look for the shapes and to look for the sort of feel of that landscape. So that's actually most of our little trees done. what you can do from here is play around with some darker colours. So at this point, I wouldn't go in with a black because we need it to recede. And even coming in with a dark indigo, you can do. So I could come in with a dark indigo down here, which is going to sit really nice with my dark greens, but it's quite dark and it's going to bring things forward again, which is not what we want. We want that kind of haze. So again, it's sort of knocking it back a little bit, and how far you want to knock it back depends a little bit on what's coming forward from there. So the next step then would be to work on this reed bed here. So if you've got that reed bed in, think about this bottom layer here and where it joins the water. See how dark that is. So we're going to come at the base of that reed bed and we're going to flick up now all the way across. And it's quite a bright green, so you can actually go bright here. So I would suggest you did go bright if you wanted to. If you've got something like a grass green on hand, then you could use that. So that's a grass green with light fast, so you could come in. So we're going at the bottom there, we're just flicking at the bottom. So you could go quite bright if you wanted to. I'm going to keep with the muted colours, so I'm going to keep with my earth green. So I'm just going to come underneath here and I'm just going to flick up then all the way across. What I'm not doing is doing parallel lines all the way across, as if I care exactly where they are. What I'd much rather do is to almost look in an opposite direction. So I could be looking out the window and just trusting myself that those lines are going to land roughly in the right place. That is how you're going to get natural grasses, is to just vary your stroke. So if I've done 1, 2, 3 strokes, they're probably all in different directions at different angles. And certainly by the time I've gone across a few and then gone back over them, they're all crisscrossy. And that's going to be much more natural than your parallel lines. So trust in yourself, trust in your pencils, that you can do that, that you can just low pressure flick across. There's another reed bed down here, so we could pop that in if we wanted to. So there's another one here, we'll do the base of that one. So there's no rules in terms of which way you do things. So now I've gone in and done the base of that one, and then I've got another bit on top. I'm not going to change my pencil, I'm just going to do more of a fluffy sort of top there to that one, and bottom of that one. There we go. I'm not doing this tree at the moment because I'm going to save doing the trees for another session. These sort of mid-ground, because this is further forward, this tree that we've got over here, so this one here, this is further forward. It's a lot darker, so if you want to put that in, you can do. If you put this in, I would be conscious of the colours that you're choosing. So if you want that tree to sit closer to your background trees in terms of the depth of the landscape, so in this photo, it's on the other side of the river. If I wanted to keep it on the other side of the river and not tell the viewer it's right in their face, then what I might do is keep with this dull green, this earth green. If I wanted to bring it forward, I might use the chrome oxide green. Even though it's darker, it's more intense colour. It's got the more saturated, it's got more pigment in there. This one, this earth green, is almost like this darker colour, but I've added white to it, and that's why it's going to sit back. If you brought in a bright colour, it's going to bring it right close to us. So if we want it to sit on the other side, of the river, what I suggest is using a combination of those sort of dull purples and maybe even a sepia 10% or a violet grey as kind of an underlayer, and then come on top with something like that green there. So Let me move this out of the way for a second. I will pop that back. So this one here, I did start off with a earth green on here, and then I had a bit of a play around with it, and I put a bit of, so you can see just there, I put a bit of a violet, ultramarine violet on top, and then I've been playing around with bringing it forward a little bit. And the darker I make this, the closer to this, to us that comes. But while we're finishing off these little trees then, the last sort of few minutes, the sky. So the sky is the other thing, and how we bring that in. So I would suggest, again, you look at the reference photo, it's pretty white at the top here. We're going to ignore the clouds for a minute because if you're interested in clouds, I've got some other resources for the clouds. We're thinking of the landscape as a whole and the feeling we get from this. So where it's hitting the top of these trees, it's quite pale. So you imagine the colours is quite intense blue, 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 and then it's paler down here. So if this was a sort of paint or a watercolour wash, we'd be increasing white as we went down, ignore the clouds. So we're doing the same sort of thing then with our pencils. So what I'd suggest doing is something like a light cobalt blue, or a sky blue. Polychromos would be fine. It's a little bit more purple leaning than some of the others. So again, that's a light cobalt blue. And then I'd probably use this technique we talked about over here. So we're doing these tight little circles, and we're just doing complete coverage, and we're just building up those layers, maybe decreasing our pressure as we go down a little bit. But I'd rather sort of increase the number of layers to get the darkness there. I'm going to do this really quickly so you can see, and sometimes actually I do just sketch in blocks of colour like this. So what I'm doing, I'm just putting a pale layer of blue in here. I'm not going as far down as the trees, so I'm almost touching the tops of those trees, but not quite. Almost touching the tops of those trees. And then what I would do is I'd take my white and I'd just sort of blend in using a harder pressure, not quite burnishing. So burnishing is when we blend all the layers together by using a hard pressure. And the problem with that is it doesn't leave us anywhere to go. So we kind of used up all the tooth. Plus it makes your arm ache after a while. It feels quite aggressive, I find. And I'd rather we had a nice soft landscape. So all I'm doing is I'm just almost losing the tops of those trees a little bit by adding some white there. And because I've got that white, it's sort of bringing in a little bit of that blue pigment if I wanted to. And then I might go again with a little blue, and I could increase the intensity a little bit. I am working really fast here just to demonstrate that to you, but you'd spend a lot more time doing this. You'd spend more time going nice and slow and filling up that blue there. So if I do this top corner section and come down, that'll be a good way of doing it. So this is the British Vellum 400, and there's quite a lot of texture to it. So it can take quite a few layers. Yeah, so I've come I've come about that far down, and then I'm really like feather light, barely touching the surface when I get near the trees. Then I've got my white, and I'm just blending it in. And then I'd probably come back with this earth green, our sort of favourite earth green, and the technique that works for me is to put my finger on the top of the pencil, because I love detail. I get quite obsessed by, I could actually spend all day just drawing these trees, and I could do them really super slowly. But when you're working on a big landscape, or the landscape isn't the focus, let's say, maybe this is a background, maybe you've got a dog in the foreground here, you don't want to spend all day just doing a single tree. So I have to fight doing all those little details, and I have to find little ways of pulling back my perfectionism. And one of those ways is to lose control of the pencil a little bit. So if I take my pencil then and I just sort of flick up, so I start in the tree and then I'm just sort of flicking up a little bit. And again, if it's not making any difference, add a bit of a harder pressure. But that's just giving me some sort of soft bits that are floating away. And if they look a little bit hard, if they look a little bit like you've got outlines, then I come in with your white and I just blend them back, or you could come in with your purple. So there's nothing to stop you having sort of a purple hue all over here. The key is going to be how this sits with the rest of that landscape. And when you start seeing the contrast of the intensity of the colours in the foreground against what we've been doing in this background here. So if I built up this reed bed a little bit, so maybe I popped in let's say I did pop in a more vibrant green just in there, it starts pushing back even further. And that's what happened with this one here, is that this is quite faded, and then what I've been doing is working on the colours in this foreground section here. And every time I come in and do a new colour on this section, make this a little bit more bright, a little bit more vibrant, then it's pushing that section back a little bit. So that's what I suggest you play with. So we've got some techniques now for the background. So as I say, we're going to work up to a poppy field, so you know how to do this bit. And the blue here you can have a little bit of a play around with. We'll obviously revisit that when we do our poppy field, but you've got the skill set now to do this background bit. And then we're also going to think about other things that we might come across, such as overhanging branches and grass and all those other fun bits. But if you wanted to carry on this bit by yourself, do so. If you've got any questions around this, these tiny trees, then let me know. And I'm on your email, so I'm not overloaded with email. I am sometimes slow to reply to emails, I will admit that. I'm sorry if there's a lot coming in, but I will get around to it, and I do love hearing from you. So if you have any questions, then do please let me know. Let me just... It's always a surprise to me when I've managed to get the cameras working properly. Yeah, so I hope that's giving you something nice to play with on a Friday afternoon. It takes a little bit of practice. There's probably a different way of doing things, but the key is we want the background to recede, and in order to do that, you want some nice pale colours in your arsenal, and you can create them with a white if you don't have them. So an ultramarine violet, lovely to have. The white, obviously, that's a great one as well. And then this earth green, I use polychromos, I use over and over again. I've gone through so many of these. That's a really nice one to have. But have a play around with lots of different colours. I have no idea what exact pencils I've used on the other pieces that I've done. I only know what I've been using recently for testing out, with these sorts of ones, and I've been using these colours recently, but I don't take a record really of the pencils that I use. I just pick out ones and sort of adapt my process a little bit. So if it's not going the way I want, I'll add a bit more white. If you want any recommendations on particular pencils and things, there's a grass guide that I've got. I can let you have that. And most of these pencils will be in there. But I wouldn't go out and buy a specific set of pencils or paper for drawing landscapes. I think you adapt to what you've got, but look for those sort of violets and blues and whites and think about receding landscapes. And if you could get your head around thinking like a giant and how it might feel, I think that's a really nice way of working. Thank you all so much. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, I have to dash. I've got to pick up the children. So I will say goodbye. Pop me an email if you need me. Okay, have a lovely weekend. Thanks so much. Bye.